Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here with Benz of Boho, and we are here in the LAMY SoHo store up in the top floor doing a somewhat impromptu Q&A. We've had to change our plans a little bit, so if the audio or video is a little bit wonky, that's because I'm the one running the show instead of Andy. But either way, we have some amazing pen fans here that came out to visit us here in SoHo, and so we wanted to do a live Q&A while we were here. So you're seeing the recording of the Q&A, so they're going to ask us questions and we'll answer them real time. So it won't be prepared like my Q&A normally is, so you're going to hear the raw questions.
Flying by the seat of our pants here today.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, well, everybody, who's got a question? Yeah.
Brian, can you talk a little bit about the jockeying that you have to do with either the distributors or the manufacturers of product when you're competing in a global market?
Okay, so the question is, what kind of jockeying that we have to do, specifically Goulet Pens, to try to get products in a global market? So, it's definitely one of the more interesting kind of behind-the-scenes things that goes on, especially being in a global market. It depends on the size of the company. So, obviously, a company like, Edison Pens, who's like a manufacturer in Ohio and they have 5 people in their company versus something like LAMY where they have hundreds of employees and they ship globally to thousands and thousands of retailers. It's very, very different from one to the other. So it's very nuanced depending on who we're talking about. But the thing that's been very interesting in the fountain pen world, so that I've found, is that there are some like up and coming brands that are growing tremendously, and there's some who have been around for decades and decades that are shrinking or trying to figure out what the internet is doing with the writing industry. So depending on how much the manufacturer and the distribution channel can really grasp what social media and social media influencers like Kara here can do for their brand, some of them are recognizing it earlier than others. I always give the LAMY folks a hard time because 8 years ago or so, when we first wanted to start carrying LAMY, they really kind of gave us a hard time about it because we didn't have a physical brick and mortar store. And we were like, well, yes, okay, we're running a business out of our garage, but here's the vision we have, here's where we see it going, this is what we want to do. We had to kind of sell them on that vision. So whereas other brands, they get it right away, and it's like, yeah, we want you to do this hardcore. LAMY, of course, we've grown with tremendously over the years, and they really understand it. They opened up their facility to us. We got to record the factory tour. They're hosting us here. So it's constantly evolving, but I think as a business owner, I have to constantly be sharing my vision with the manufacturers as to what it is that we can do for the brand, partnering up and seeing who really sees that vision, because any brand that's been around for decades and decades, they've seen changes happen. They've seen, LAMY, for example, they saw the Berlin Wall fall, and that changed how the business operated. Yeah. Like, they've been through major changes over the years, and the internet is a huge disruptor. And so we kind of represent that new way of doing business, and a lot of retailers are having to change the way they do things. A lot of manufacturers are having to change the way they look at global marketing and global distribution. So it's really those who are having an open dialogue and are looking to discuss with retailers like us who are very grassroots with the pen community, I think are seeing the most benefit from what we have to offer. And those who are resisting it are going to have more challenges.
I think things will continue to change and evolve too. I know I'm not speaking from experience here, but even those of us now where influencer marketing is kind of the thing and doing the more grassroots and the internet taking over everything, that's bound to evolve and change too. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, when you're up there in age and how things are changing.
What are you trying to say, Kara? I know I got a few grays coming in,
soon,
but no. A lot is definitely changing. Yeah. I've seen a lot of changes in the last 9 years since I've been in the business, and there's a lot more I think that's coming that's going to put what's already happened to shame. We'll think like, wow, remember how simple it was when it was only Instagram and we didn't have like contact lenses with social media feeds directly into our brain, and like 10 years from now, like who knows what we're going to face and what that could mean, specifically for the writing industry. So I think those who are thinking forward and trying to stay in touch with the community are going to see the most benefit in the years to come.
Yeah. You have any other questions?
Yes.
All right, I probably already asked you these questions, but again, it's both for you, Kara and Brian. I quizzed you about how you started your business, and again, congratulations on your 9th year, Brian, I know.
Thank you.
In your company. But for both of you, because again, I create also Kara, what is the most challenging thing to start a business right now? I know right now, these are challenging times right now. But for those who are witnessing or wanting to start a business, what are the tips for those who want?
It's a great question.
It is a really good
Kara,
question.
you're living it right now.
Yeah,
You're
I
more
really
in the starting
am.
phase.
And in case that didn't pick it up, he was asking about tips on how to start a business in this day and age. And really, I think it's easier than ever to start a business the way things are now. Really, all you need is a cell phone in a lot of cases. It just depends on your idea and what you want to bring out into the world. But for me, the biggest thing has just been staying true to what I'm passionate about and making sure I'm doing something that I enjoy so that that passion translates into my work and what I'm putting out there. Also just kind of being in tune with what people want. Like my business has grown leaps and bounds since I started in 2015. And I think the big reason for that is because I kind of kept my ears to the ground to see what people were looking for and, you know, what resonated with them, what I posted online, and maybe I could turn that into a product or a service of some sort. And also what kept me growing too is giving back. Like I give back as much as I possibly can, and sometimes a little excessively. It's in my nature to give a lot. So I do a lot of freebies. I build a lot of community. And I think especially like people my age and those younger coming up, what they're looking for in businesses are those that do get involved, create a community, kind of make it a family. Like you've created an amazing community with Goulet. And yeah, it's just
I
being
think it's pretty cool.
passionate and really just trying to be an overall decent human and a business owner.
Yeah, and I think I can resonate with that a lot. The thing that I think about with what Kara's done and you're doing right now, even as you're getting to like digital planning and how does that fit into actual bullet journals and paper and pens and all that kind of stuff. That makes me think about, especially in my first 3-4 years, where I started out making pens, right? And it was like not a profitable business venture for me, but it was what was required for me to discover fountain pens and get into it. So the term that comes to mind for me is prospecting. Like, you had a passion, I had a passion. We didn't know exactly what that was going to translate into, especially with kind of the changing landscape of business and social media. So it was hard to say, here's my 5-year business plan, and this is exactly how it's going to go.
It will never go that way.
Yeah, like that's less relevant today, I think, than probably ever. So for me and for you and what you've experienced has been, okay, I'm really passionate about this. Let me go hard at this and try a bunch of different stuff. Okay, 90% of it's not going to work, but this 10% thing, this is kind of interesting. Let me go deeper into this. And then you kind of end up going down 3 or 4 different rabbit trails, and then you find that one thing that's like, okay, here's this little niche that is really interesting and no one's serving it, and it meets my skill sets and who I am, and I can really go hard at this and become the best person at this very obscure thing, And I think we both kind of experienced that, and that allows you then to just flourish in terms of like who you are and what you bring, because you're not competing in such a broad area. It's like the big fish in a small pond kind of thing. But kind of going off of what Kara said of it's never been easier to start a business. It's also never been easier for other people to start a business too. So I think there's a big challenge to be had there. It's like Kara does bullet journaling, but so do a lot of other people. So I think in a way that almost makes it difficult for mediocre people who aren't super passionate or aren't super knowledgeable or maybe aren't the hardest workers to really thrive and grow a business. Whereas
That's where the passion comes in.
exactly. So like if you really got the goods and you've got the talent and you go at it hard and you find the right thing, there's amazing opportunities in all kinds of obscure little areas to where you could make a living making, a decent living doing something if you're a huge fan of like Ninja Turtles.
Making Christmas
right?
sweaters.
Christmas sweaters, yes.
Yeah.
Little shout out to Sweater Jerk here on Instagram. She designed this sweater, and
That's what she does. She makes sweaters.
She makes Christmas sweaters full time. Like there's never been an opportunity to do obscure stuff like that if you are willing to do enough prospecting and find those little veins of gold.
Agreed. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question for Kara, actually.
Yeah.
So, we're here at the LAMY shop, and it's all about writing instruments, right? So I brought you in as a bullet journalist, and I'm just wondering, and I could work it back the other way from Brian, is how does that work into, your relationship with writing instruments? And how do you look at brands, actually, that you might want to be associated with your bullet journaling?
When it comes to brands and bullet journaling, as far as like pens and writing instruments, I've never been super loyal to any specific brands because I've found things that I love in a lot of different brands. Now, there are some things that I really look for, like a super fine nib, because I write really small, and we have like the 5mm dot grid notebooks, so we need to write tiny. Things like that, and then affordability and things that I like to share are definitely like the more affordable. I love sharing the All-Stars and the Safaris because those are great entry-level pens. In my community, it's not really a fountain pen community per se, it's more a pen and paper community. So these people are really getting into bullet journaling and they're discovering fountain pens for the first time. So being able to share something that's accessible to everyone is really nice. Like, we had a lady here tonight who had never tried a fountain pen before. She came to see me, and she's like, what do I start with? So I was like, well, check out this one that you got in your little gift bag. Like, let's check out how it writes. I showed her how it worked. And then she's like, but how do I use my own ink? And I was like, oh, there's these magical things called converters. And she went and bought a converter and left really, really happy.
Nice.
But for me, it's about like people having those experiences, because I still remember what it was like getting my first fountain pen and watching all of Brian's videos, trying to learn how to clean it and maintain it, and then falling down the rabbit hole of gold nibs and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
I've been an enabler for many of Kara's
Yes.
pens.
Brian has been known
Some
to call
indirectly.
me or email me and be like, guess what's coming?
Yes.
You need this now.
Kara, this turquoise pen is coming. It needs to be yours.
Anything
how do we
teal.
make that happen? Yeah,
Kara.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And for Brian, as like your company, how are you going after like a younger community now? Because obviously writing instruments lend themselves to possibly an older community. So like, what are the tools, or how are you looking at how do we capture the next generation for this?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's been on my mind from like day one, because I first discovered, I'd never written with a fountain pen before. I was 25 years old. I was making ballpoint and rollerball pens for, out of wood, engraving them, selling them as gift pens, corporate things like that. I wanted a better writing experience, but I had not yet been enlightened to the fountain pen experience. So I very much have that conversion experience like hardwired into my DNA. But I was a relatively young person at 25 when that happened. And so I went to the DC Fountain Pen Show in 2009, and I saw a sea of gray hair. And then there was me and like a couple other younger folks in there, and I was like, where is the future of this industry that I've never heard anything about as a younger person? I didn't grow up with these things in school. A lot of the folks who'd been into it for decades maybe didn't really want to necessarily spend the time to teach the absolute basics to somebody that didn't know anything about it, And I was like, well, what is the answer here? Well, obviously, like YouTube videos and social media lends itself to that, because one person could shoot a very thorough, incredibly thoughtfully produced video once, and then it's out there to be shared with everybody. It can be watched to the point of memorization, and it's not too burdensome on the producer to put it out, as long as you have the right knowledge and you do it well. So that's the opportunity that I saw in 2009. The only problem was I didn't know how to shoot videos. I didn't know anything about pens. I'd never run a business before, but I had to shoot. I just had to figure all that stuff out, and then the opportunity was there to be had. So really, from the very beginning, a lot of the motivation was for the future of the entire fountain pen industry. It needs to be passed on to the next generation, and it was very obvious to me, as part of that next generation, that social media and online education was going to be a huge part of that. So that's why, when I didn't even know anything, I had to go out there and learn everything I could about a single notebook. I would spend 8 to 10 hours studying and researching one single notebook, a $5 notebook, and put out a video on it, and then I would maybe sell 10, and then that gave me enough money to then buy another product, and I'd have to learn it all over again, and then put out a video, and I'd sell 10 of those, and then maybe 5 of the other one that I'd done. And now I had a little bit more money, and I put it into the next product. So for me, the video thing was an education for myself because I didn't know these products, but it was also education for the community. So it was really a relationship with the community that we see here, being physically together. Many of us have never met each other before, but yet we all have a kinship with each other. Some of us are like now friends and like taking pictures together, and it's just this amazing fabric that's already been within the community. You can credit me with coming up with a community. I don't take any credit for that because it was already there.
Yeah.
I just recognized that it was there and that it just needed to be kind of curated and cultivated and being given a home. Like Goulet Nation is a great example of that. I've done very little with the curation of Goulet Nation, which is our private Facebook group.
I love it in there.
There's close to 10,000 members in that group now, and it's like literally to the point where that group on their own, like someone lost their house in the California wildfire, and like they got like 20 packages of pens from people that bought and sent it to them because they lost everything in the fire. And it's like, that doesn't happen in most communities, you know what I mean? That's a really special thing. So to see that carry on, and it's a lot of younger generation who are socially connected, and but honestly, it's a good mix. It's not all young people. It's not all people, more experienced people. I hate to say older folks, but experienced individuals. It's really a good mix, and that's part of what I love about the pen community is
And
it kind of
kids,
transcends
too.
all that. Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
kids.
Yeah,
Like my daughter's 12 and she loves pens.
that's awesome.
Like all she wants for Christmas is more fountain pens.
Nice.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
you're
great.
raising her right. What can I say?
She's
Exactly.
expensive.
Yeah, but for me, the answer has been social media and community engagement, especially with something as kind of disparate as the pen community is. We're all like that weird pen person at work, right? But yeah, when we come together, it's like, all right, we're all that weird pen person at work, But maybe if we can recruit a couple other pen people that we know, we won't be the only weird person at work. We can gather together at the sink at work and clean our pens together.
I love it.
Yeah.
So this is a question for both of you guys. What's something that you do in your day-to-day lives, or maybe some influence that you have, that would have surprised you if somebody told you we were going to have that like 5 years ago?
Everything.
Any of it? Yeah.
Well, pick 2 things.
Kara? You were in a more different place 5 years ago,
Yes.
probably.
Well, 5 years ago, I was waiting tables and bartending. So it's a far cry from what I'm doing now. And I never would have imagined that something as simple as a notebook and some pens would change my life so much. I think my biggest thing has been seeing this community grow out of what I love to do. That's been the biggest thing. Like I never, ever in a million years thought that I would inspire as many people as I have that have said that I've inspired them. And it's like, I'm going to tear up a little bit because it makes me emotional. Like I never would have thought. And being able to turn something that I love into a way to be a second income or almost a primary income in my family, like that is huge to me. I thought we would be living paycheck to paycheck forever as a military spouse and bartender. I mean, there's only so high you can go. So that change has been incredible. Like it's completely opened doors that I never would have had. It's great.
Yeah. So,
All of that.
yeah, that's pretty, make me tear up. For me, where was I 5 years ago? So I was 4 years into this business. At this point, the Goulet Pen Company was sort of a known quantity. I had probably about 20 people in my company. And I was just at the point realizing that, hey, there's something bigger here than just, a mom and pop. We started a company. Oh, cool, we got a commercial space. Oh, cool, people know who we are, that kind of thing. I was like, oh my gosh, like I had to build up leadership within my company. I had to establish core values and purpose and mission and stuff like into the company. I was like, oh dang, this is like bigger than just me or some like the initial
You're not
story.
just stocking shelves and shipping things.
Yeah. It wasn't just like, oh cool, we kind of figured something out with social media. Now it's like, oh man, there was people like having families and buying houses, and I was like, ooh, okay, there's people like building their careers upon what they're doing at the Goulet Pen Company and people whose lives have really influenced. So for me, I think, of course, the involvement in the community is something that I draw a lot of inspiration from, but even more internally, like with my own team. Now we have 39 people in our company, and some very legitimate people who are building careers, and like, and I've had people that have left in those 5 years that have gone on to start their own businesses and do things, and they've gone and maybe pursued some completely other different venture, but they say the time that I spent here was the best time that I had, or it changed me in such a way that I've been, and so realizing like, wow, I'm really have the opportunity to impact my own team's lives in such a way that is so much richer than what I could have imagined when I was first doing it. Because, you know, kind of like you said, it's like you're trying to figure it out and like scrap something together for so long that once you kind of do, and then you're like, oh dang, like, okay, that's fixed, but there's this whole other thing now that I got to address, and it's like it's challenging me in a whole new way. And now it's to the point where like, all right, now since the last 5 years, not only do I have like managers in place, I now have directors in charge of my managers. So I have like 2 layers of leadership in between me and my team that's working kind of at the, you know, the front lines, if you will. So it's challenging me as a leader to grow in whole new ways in communication structure and organizational health within our company. So that's something that I had a very slight inkling to, but I had no idea how much time and effort it would require for me to focus and be challenged to grow as the leader of all of that.
David?
Sure. So a lot of the answers touch on like kind of like community and knowledge and learning.
Sure.
You've both been like the launching points for learning about like the fountain pen world and the journaling world.
Yeah.
Is there any direction you want to steer the communities in the future?
Any directions we want to steer the communities in? Kara, how will you wield your powers?
Do I have a scepter or a sword? I need to know. You know, when it comes to the community, especially the bullet journal community, I think the biggest thing is more of a unity. Like I've expressed this in a few different videos. There's a lot of debates that always go around about what's the right way to bullet journal, and you know, if you do a lot of art in your journal, is that really still a bullet journal, or is it sticking to the original method? And every now and then something pops up. I was in a Facebook group earlier today, and it popped up, and there's this big hoopla about, you know, this guy's really minimalist, this girl makes really pretty drawings, and they were going back and forth. It's not a bullet journal. It is. It's not. It is.
Yes.
I think seeing less of that is the direction I would steer the community in. And just knowing that we're all on different journeys. Everybody's planner or bullet journal is completely unique to them. No 2 notebooks are going to be exactly alike. And just embrace what works for you and let others embrace what works for them. And we help each other out and inspire each other daily. I like it.
Yeah. For me, you know, it's interesting the way you pose that question, because I don't view myself as really having that much power or control over guiding the community in any which way. I view myself really as like a servant to the community, because honestly, it's so fresh in my mind from those early days where I knew nothing, and I was very humbly asking like, what is a converter? You know, wait, there's different converters for different pens? Like, that is so burnt into my brain that I am constantly motivated to, you know, even now as I'm dealing with some very fancy high-end pens, still focused on that intro level person. Like, fountain pens, for those of us who are like deep into it or had it experience for decades, we can take for granted that like the broader community has no idea how these things really work. They may have some slight knowledge of it, or like, I think I saw it in a movie, or my grandfather might have used these, or you know, they might have some little opening, introduction into it, but they haven't really like gotten the bug yet, you know? So for me, I think continuing to focus on the new people into it is really what I want to try to do for myself, because it would be so easy for me, as long as I've been doing this and as deep as I've gotten into it, to go the route of, you know, more...
I'm at this level now.
Yeah, like more technical, or another frickin' Safari. Like, come on, I want something really challenging. I'm picking on LAMY here. You know, like, it's another green Safari, whatever, you know, but it's like still really getting excited about it on behalf of the community. As a person who, I guess I kind of serve in this dual role as retailer, but also influencer, you know, is like, I sort of represent the excitement and enthusiasm that happens in the pen community. So making sure that I am genuine in my own excitement there, and that I don't go down some like obscure route in myself, you know, and then kind of lose my way. But I think,
I think too, as an outside commentary to this whole thing, that kind of leads back to what you were saying about your first time at, you know, the pen show when you walked in and everybody's like gray haired and older.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get that younger group in? Like, obviously by focusing on those who are new to the community and help them grow and get to the level where we're at. That's a no-brainer way to keep growing our community.
And I think those of you that have been involved in the pens for maybe 5 years or more, you've probably seen that a little bit. There's been more intro-level pens. There's been more brands that have surfaced that were not in existence before. There have been more forums and groups and Facebook groups and all these types of things that didn't exist before that talk about, you know, Reddit and like all these things where it's like talk about inexpensive fountain pens and starter pens and all these types of things is happening more than it used to. So that's where I would like to see it continue. Of course, as those younger people and as those newer people into the pen community kind of age up, you know, they might kind of get back into it and be like, oh, I got a little money now, so this could be a little more interesting now, you know. So for me, it's focusing on really serving the full gamut, because like any niche hobby, you know, you can continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. Not everybody will, but trying to maintain that same level of service and that same kind of authenticity and welcoming feeling for me personally, but also the Goulet Pens as a company, for people who are into $8,000 Namiki Maki high-end, you know, artistic stuff, and people who are looking for a $5 pen because they are a student and they just really want something cool and fun to write with, getting just as excited and serving just as well in both of those extremes. Yeah.
So this is kind of like a two-part question. So the first one is like in adherence to building the community, I would like to ask you, like, how would you like to build, like, what's the next, build your respective businesses, like what's the next big thing that you're focusing on? And the second part is, like, since we are talking about a lot of young people in the community, like with events like Inktober and all, I've noticed that like a lot of young artists are coming back into inks and fountain pens. What is your take on that?
Yeah. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Kara?
What's next, especially as far as community goes? For me, I want to host like the biggest conference like every single year. I started last year with just our very first Boho Berry meetup. And we had about 50 people come out to New Jersey just for the day. It was great. Everybody had an amazing time, and I loved it. But we're going to keep doing that every year. So I want to keep building and growing that. Just a place where we can all get together once a year, no matter where we're from, and hang out and just share our love of planners and bullet journals and pens, all the pens. And yeah, I think my biggest goal is just to keep growing like our social media groups, like Facebook groups, because that's where all the magic happens to me. And I've seen that in Goulet Nation too, where everyone just, any question anyone has, someone will hop in and answer. And it's not all, like, I don't have to be there for it to happen. It's like the community just comes together and kind of helps each other out and grows. And it's just really heartwarming to see it. So I want to keep that growing as much as possible.
Yeah, and as somewhat of an outsider to like the Bujo community, it's still a really young community. Like bullet journaling really has only been around for
4 years.
4 years? Mm-hmm. That's really
Well, 5.
young. 5 years,
5 in August.
Yeah,
Yep.
that Ryder came up with it, and you know, he just published his first book about bullet journaling, so that will hopefully
good.
make it a little more mainstream perhaps and clarify it for more. So it's still like a lot of what Kara's speaking about from my perspective is just the community is still kind of figuring itself out. You know, there's still a lot of debate about what even is bullet journaling mean, you know, and it could kind of splinter into subgroups and stuff like that. And it'll take time for that to figure out. Fountain pen community is, you know, fountain pens have been around for 150 years. So there's a little more of a pool to draw from there in terms of what it actually means. You know, for me, in terms of, you know, the next big thing, well, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have my planning session with my leadership team about what does 2019 mean for us. So it's a little bit yet to be defined, but, you know, without getting too detailed into that, you know, a lot of it is we've reached a point with Goulet Pens where we are our own brand, right? So there is a brand behind Goulet Pens. And, you know, speaking about some questions earlier about like challenges with distribution and manufacturing and things like that, I get asked all the time about like, when is there going to be another Goulet pen again? Go back to your roots, manufacture your own, like that kind of stuff. And that's natural. You know, when we've been around for a certain period of time and the brand is there and the trust is there behind the products we curate, because largely we are curating products at this point that other people are manufacturing. You know, certainly getting more into co-branded design, developments, you know, manufacturing is a little further down the road because it requires a skill set that is even deeper than what I have right now. So getting deeper involved and closer to the manufacturing process. You know, you're seeing this year with Goulet Pens, we've come out with more exclusives and things like that than ever before. This holiday season, even my team is like, good golly, this is so much stuff, you know, but like we have goals set, you know, because for us, it's not just like a fountain pen community related goal, but it's like, I got to think about like Amazon and like other e-commerce and like, you know, I'm not so worried about, you know, smaller retailers and stuff like that because we've gotten a nice little niche for ourselves, but I'm worried about the macro of, you know, much larger things, industry trends, where's the writing community as a whole going? So I got to think about what unique value can I bring and how is that going to happen? So I'm thinking like even deeper in terms of, you know, developing things that have not been seen before, trying to make things interesting and not just being one among many in the global community who carries the same product that you could buy in multiple different places. So drawing upon the knowledge, the touch points we have with the community and developing things that have not been seen or that maybe have been seen and been interesting, but haven't made sense for one company to go in and do it, you know, exclusives and colors and all interesting things that like, you know, flex nibs and these types of things that you're like, seem so obvious, like, why isn't anybody developing it? And it's like, well, it's very disparate and spread out, but with focused intention, maybe there could be some things that we lead the charge and really take the risk and do it. So I could see going more down that road and just really becoming more of like the go-to source and the ones who are known for kind of being the voice of the community and bringing products to light amongst a lot of different brands, as well as perhaps our own someday, for those things that the community would really love to see, but maybe wouldn't happen otherwise.
Cool.
Yeah.
Could be the last question maybe. But,
We're doing pretty good on time.
Yeah, if I would say, Ryan, as a craftsman starting out, or making pens, and then you got the fortunate, events that you went to LAMY in Heidelberg, and then you went to Pineider and Montegrappa in Italy, and then you went to the distribution center in Florida for pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see in terms of design or manufacturing or whatever aspects that you didn't realize until you were there, that was apparent to you that say, oh, you know, this is a good idea, or you see some flourishes in terms of aspects of the engineering or design?
Yeah, so you're talking like specifically the design components?
Correct.
Yeah, so to summarize that question, as I've gotten closer and gotten to see the manufacturing process at these multiple facilities, what elements have I seen in the design process that have been interesting or then coming out? I think, you know, one of the biggest things from a broader stroke perspective that I've seen from touring facilities and talking more closely, you know, the higher up you go in the food chain and the closer you get to the manufacturing process, you realize all business is just people. Like, it's really all people. Just like the community, it's all people. So you think of these brands as these big monolithic things. It's all made up of people. Like, there's a DNA and there's a fabric within every company. But you can tell as members of the community which companies are being run by people who don't really understand the business and those that really care and the heart is really there. And I probably don't even have to tell you. You probably have some brands that are coming to mind right now where you're like, the hell are these people up to? And the other ones where you're like, they freaking get it, you know? I'm seeing that play out, and as I've gotten closer to the source in many companies, you're able to tell, you're like, yep, okay, yeah, there's good things happening here. And so, like from a specific, so that's the big perspective, right? So like the companies that really care and really get it and are engaged in the community and they just give a crap. And it's not just about selling stuff. They're not part of some larger conglomerate that it's just part of their portfolio, and as long as they make some sales numbers, they're happy. You know, that doesn't work in a niche environment like this, especially from a design standpoint, because you're going to come out with things that are stale, that have been done before, and aren't going to do well every time, and it's just going to ride the name, and it's just not going to be interesting. So those brands, you know, I'll use TWSBI as an example because TWSBI's come up a lot tonight, and TWSBI and LAMY, a lot of people own both. You know, it's because they're disrupting. They're trying to do some innovation, focus on value and these types of things. You know, LAMY's been doing a really great job in the last probably 4 or 5 years, coming out with special editions and matching inks to the pens.
Get me every time.
And like, I know, and it's like, you know, you're like, dang it, another one, but it's not going to be around. I got to get it, you know. So it's, but that's what is keeping things interesting in the community. So, you know, from a design standpoint, I think it's very interesting because there's a lot of shifting that's going around. It's been interesting for me to get closer to the manufacturing process because I've realized just how technical fountain pen technology really is. It's a lot of it's largely been figured out, like the patents and stuff for feed mechanism, pistons and stuff like that. Like I think Pelican is one of the first ones to develop a patented piston mechanism, and it's celebrating its 90th anniversary next year, you know? And so it's like some of the technology is super old, but yet it's not like that easy to replicate. You need like industrial engineers and like stuff like that to really be able to make this stuff. So it's been interesting that it's such kind of has-been technology in some ways, but yet it is actually rather complicated, you know, and you can only push the laws of physics but so far in the development of a fountain pen. So there's certain elements that are not so much technology, like, you know, one of the interesting brands, I haven't had a chance to tour their facility, they invited me, but I couldn't fit it in my schedule, was Conid. I don't carry their brand, I talk about them from time to time, but they're like a aerospace engineer company or something like that. But there's like this group of them that are really into pens, and they kind of created Conid as this like offshoot of, they really wanted to create these cool pens. And they came up with a filling mechanism that I'd never seen before that I'm fascinated by. So it's really interesting to see that. But that, again, that's a perfect example of like purely fueled by passion of these people that had the technical knowledge and have created this thing. They don't have the means to do a global distribution, so they only sell direct. So for me, it's interesting, as I've gotten closer to some smaller like boutique manufacturers, you know, people like Edison Pens, for example, started in his garage, very similar kind of story, like bootstrapped. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep before he did it, like no background in pen making, purely fueled by passion. But now he's got 5 employees, and they're growing. And we, not to brag, but like I really worked closely with Brian Gray and his wife Andrea and their team as they grew to help, like, okay, let's try doing some exclusives and some stuff together and bringing them along. So like there's been a close relationship we've had with them. I can see more opportunities in the future to do that with smaller boutique brands. It gets a little tougher because there's so many elements, and you got a business background, you know, there's so many elements that come into play, and you know, because you're doing it yourself, it's freaking hard to bootstrap something from the ground up. I could see in one facet of what I do in the future to be involved with smaller manufacturers and really help them to guide them on some of the pitfalls, because literally some of them don't even know like how much they should charge for their products. Like a lot of them start out selling direct, you know, and then when they go to sell to a retailer, they're like, oh, okay, well, you can just take a 10% cut of the retail price and all that. And I'm like, that's not going to work. Like, no retailer can survive with that. You know, you're going to have to do a certain pricing model and yada, yada. And they're like, what? What do you mean? You know, and it's like, whew, just no clue. But they might have an amazing product. So kind of partnering them and working with them long term, I could see maybe developing something along the lines of that. And then really just helping to identify and encourage the aspects of pen design that I'm seeing that the community would really respond to. It gets difficult because, and I know LAMY deals with it sometimes, when you're developing something new, there's research and development, it takes a lot of time, and you got to pay back that time. And so it has to be kind of worth it, in the end. So it's always a balance for any manufacturer to kind of take a risk on developing something new, especially with the fountain pen market that's, in some ways it's growing, in other ways it's not in certain markets. And, like Italian pen companies, for example, you've seen Delta go out of business. You've seen Omas go out of business. A lot of that had to do with the Italian economy and what happened in 2008 and 9, with what Italian banks and the funding that they had. And it didn't have anything to do with the manufacture of the pens, but it was a bigger macro thing that kind of hit. So there's some uneasiness in the more established pen community and just not understanding technology of the social media and stuff like that. So some of it is they don't necessarily want to take huge risks in the development and design of products because of some of the uneasiness, or maybe they just kind of got rattled from 10 years ago and they're kind of just getting out of that. And, or maybe they feel it looming again because, we're about due for another one, right? So there may be some of that too. So it's really just encouraging the manufacturers to stay in touch with the community and go with their guts about what they think is going to do well. And the companies that have been doing that have been seeing success. Yeah. Cool. We can do, oh gosh, everybody's got questions. Can we do one more question? Yeah, let's do one more.
So you mentioned some things, some new designs that have never been really seen before, some innovative things.
Sure.
But on the flip side, are there any technologies or techniques or designs that you have seen in older vintage pens that kind of went, phased out, or something that you thought were clever and you'd like to see come back?
Oh gosh, it's my Achilles heel, vintage pens here. It's interesting how it ebbs and flows. I was thinking even just like recently I've been talking with my teams, just something as simple as like which nib size people prefer. For the last 5 years or so, broad nibs have been shrinking and dying and, not been widely available. Those of you who are into broads, it's like been harder and harder to find them. Rachel is like a huge proponent of broad nibs and is like trying to bring them back. We're noticing that people are actually buying them. Like we've got certain pen brands now where broads sell about the same as a 1.1 millimeter. And I'm like, what? Like I'm shocked by that. I'm like, is that really true? I know, but so it's going to come in waves like that. So some of it is like really being, communicative with the manufacturers about like, hey, here's what's actually selling. Like this is what people are asking for. This is what's moving through our doors. So you need to develop more of these things because this is where the trend is going. Whereas historically, I think brands have done market research, like at the global level, developed products, and then pushed it out to the community. That's been turned on its head in the last 10 years because of social media, which is why we are invited to things like this because we're super engaged with the community, and that is beneficial to manufacturers like LAMY to be in touch with people like us because we're spending more time there than maybe they could. So that's kind of interesting. But relating back to vintage pens, I think there's a huge opportunity for manufacturers to go back and look at old patents that have lapsed and maybe come up with some interesting things that they're not necessarily having to reinvent the wheel because it's already been invented, but they could maybe look at some old filling mechanisms that would seem brand new to newer members of the community, but those who've been in the community for 50 years would be like, oh man, yeah, I had that. So that's something interesting that you asking that question has prompted that in my brain to be like, that would be kind of interesting to develop some of those.
It happens in fashion all the time. I mean, go to Target right now and all you see is like 90s clothes. I kind of stocked up last time I was there, not gonna lie. But my daughter was so excited. She's like, Mom, look at this. I'm like, I had that when I was your age. Mom, look at this. I had that when I was your age. Like, Why can't that be a thing with fountain pens too? Like, go back and take more inspiration from, because some of the vintage pens, I'm also not very versed in vintage pens, but some of them that I have seen, and I'm like, that would be amazing if they made something like that today.
Yeah, everything old is new again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Maybe even improve on them with
Yeah.
your materials and your
Definitely, definitely. There's some stuff like there's some vintage materials like celluloids and stuff like that that are now kind of coveted, partly because they're not widely made anymore. So they become rarer and rarer, that become more on the pricey side of things. Not that it would necessarily be practical to produce them anymore, but it could be interesting to revisit certain materials that were once in vogue, much like the fashion sense, that you could bring back. You know, I think we've seen that. We have a pen, Monograppa, the Shiny Lines Dove, that we did, that was a pretty expensive pen that uses a celluloid, and we kind of got a lot of them, really. It was a bit of a stretch for us, but they've done really well because they're using this vintage-looking material that is really hard to find. So I could see an opportunity to not have to invent completely new technology, but draw upon things that were around 40 years ago or 60 years ago in the pen community and put a modern spin on them. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but those who, I mean, LAMY has people that have been working at the factory for 50 years. So they might know, you know, whoever, Gustav, who's been working at the factory for 50 years, who could talk about the pens that he used in school, and that could become inspiration for something new. There's a lot of like storytelling of the old you know, brand and old products and stuff like that is coming in vogue, especially with so many companies coming up on their anniversaries, like Pilot's 100th anniversary, Platinum hits 100 next year's, Aurora is, oh gosh, 100 years next year. Like there's some really milestone things that's causing some of that to bubble up again to the surface. So that would be kind of interesting.
Great.
Cool. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up because we need to let you all go, or you're like prisoners here.
Oh, goodness.
For those of you who are watching on the video, thank you so much for watching. This was kind of something different for us.
Yeah, it's fun.
But anyway, we'll try and get this posted, and we'll see how it goes. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Kara, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and LAMY for hosting us as well. And we hope you enjoyed this, and right on.
Bye.